Welcome to Mrs. G's Math Stop.
For today's lesson, we're going to be covering how to graph linear equations. And I like to call these 10-second graphs. Once you get very comfortable with slope-intercept form, you will be able to do any graph in slope-intercept form in 10 seconds or less. So let's see if you guys can challenge today. Let's remind ourselves what slope-intercept form is. It's when the y is by itself and it says y equals mx plus b. So m is our slope, and we can locate it because it's always right in front of our x. B is our other key factor, and that is our y-intercept. So y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So there are two steps to be able to graph when given it in slope-intercept form. So step number one is to plot your y-intercept. And step number two, from that point, we're going to graph our slope. So let's follow our step one and our step two, and let's try it with our first example. So if you have some handy, our first example is going to be y equals 2/3 x minus 1. So our first two things that we want to do is to identify our b and our m. B we can always find because it's the number all by itself. So if I put 1, I wouldn't quite be right. Can you look up there and think why it's not a 1? The number that is completely by itself is actually a -1. The sign that's in front of the number belongs to that number. And then my m is the number in front of my x, so that would be my 2/3. So thinking back to the last slide, it told us step number one is to plot my b, and I'm going to plot it on my y-axis. So if here's my x and here's my y-axis, if my b is -1, I'm going to go down to -1 and make my point. And then step two said, from that point, we're going to graph my slope. So if my slope is 2/3, my top number is considered my rise, which can go up or down. My bottom number is considered my run, and it's going to go to the right. So if it's a +2, think about which direction I would go, up or down. I would go up, so I'm going to cross off my down arrow. Positive numbers means we're going to go up. The bottom number, we're going to go to the right. So from my blue dot on my graph, let's go up 2 spaces and to the right 3 spaces. So that would put me right there. And we want to do our graph or our plotting our slope more than one time. So let's go ahead and go up 2 and to the right 3. We can do it as many times as we need to until we see this really nice, neat line. Now, once you get comfortable going one direction, you can go back and add the other half of your graph in as well. So if I went up 2/3 before, the opposite direction would be down 2 to the left 3. Down 2 to the left 3. And you have your nice line in there that you can draw in. So not too bad. Let's think about what we did one more time. 2 steps. So step number one, let me grab my little, I used to have some kind of a pointer tool here. There we go. So step number one is to identify your b, which is the number by itself, and then to identify your m, which is the number in front of your x. You're going to plot b on the graph, and it goes right on the y-axis, and then from that point, you're going to do your slope, up 2/3, up 2/3. So let's try it again. So here we go. Step number one is to identify your m and your b. So the number that's all by itself is a +1. And my slope is the number in front of my x. Now last time it was a fraction. This time it's just a 2. We always want to consider making slope a fraction. Sorry, -2. There we go. So how am I going to make -2 into a fraction? Because we know that the top number is supposed to go up or down, and the bottom number is supposed to go to the right. So I need to add a bottom number. Remembering back to earlier math classes, you can add a 1 underneath any number, and then there you go, you have a fraction. So if it's a negative 2, what do you guys think? Would you go up or would you go down for a negative? You would go down. So let's start with our b though, because that's always step 1. So step number 1, plot our b. My b is a positive 1. So on my y-axis, I'm going to go to positive 1 and do my dot. And then from that dot, I have a negative 2 over 1. The negative will always belong with the top number. So if you guys see it out in front, go ahead and just stick it with the top number for purposes of graphing slope. And from my dot, we'll go down 2 to the right 1. Down 2 to the right 1. Down 2 to the right 1. Once you get comfortable going one direction, go ahead and go the other. And there's your graph. Oops, I put that one in the wrong spot. What I like to tell students is that, just to remind you, that we read graphs the way that we read books. You're always going to start at the left-hand side and go to the right-hand side. If you're going from left to right and you're going down, your slope should be negative. That makes sense. Our last problem on the last slide, if you go left to right, it goes up. So our slope should have been positive, and it was. That's just a quick way to double check yourself that you graphed your slope correctly. Okay, let me have you try there. Y equals x. So let's see. Let's take 3 seconds, and can you tell me what B and M are? Kind of tricky because there's some numbers missing this time. So B is always the number that's all by itself at the end. I don't see one there. So what would my B be? What would my y-intercept be? Well, there's a 0 there, because that's the same as saying plus 0. How about my M? M's the number in front of my slope. There is a number there, it's just hiding. When we don't see a number but it's touching the x, that's the same as saying 1. So my b this time is 0, and my slope is 1. To make my slope a fraction, I could say 1 over 1. So I would go up 1 to the right 1. Up 1 to the right 1. Up 1 to the right 1. There you go. So let's do a quick quiz just to make sure that you guys have these 10-second graphs down pat. And here you go. So last question. Test yourself. Y equals 1/4 x minus 2. I'm going to count you down, and I want you to see if you can do it in 10 seconds or less. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And your graph should have looked like this. So your b is at negative 2. And from that dot, we're doing our slope, which is up 1 over 4. Up 1 over 4. So those are what we call 10-second graphs, because you need 2 pieces of information to graph your line. Thanks. I hope that this was helpful. Bye.